Forget. All right, so we're recording now. Let me go back to share my screen. Uh, okay, so we're talking about the theoretical framework. This theoretical framework is derived from the chair of the Pan African Studies Department, Dr. Nana Lawson Bush. He is well versed in studying the Black male experience. This framework is African American male theory. That's the theory that we're working from. The framework specifies states African American boys and men are resilient and resistant. African American male theory posits that African American boys and men are born with an innate desire for self determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. So, for me in this class, I'd like to expand the theory a little bit beyond just males, right? I look at it as an all-encompassing theory for African people as a whole. So African women, African girls, etc. But what's important, right? They're resistant and resilient with an innate. So when we say innate, that means they come out the womb with this desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity to be moral and to be intelligent, right? So myself, I'm not. I came up in a Christian home, but I am not a Christian. I'm not. I wouldn't ascribe to that. I'm more into the African spiritual traditions. But in the Bible, there is some truths, right? And it says in Genesis, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." This is what God says, according to the Bible. Scientifically, historically, archaeologically, African people were the first people on the planet, right? This cannot be argued. This cannot be refuted. You could try, but you would be wrong, right? For those who have to hear from a white man's mouth for it to be true, even the white man will say that the African are the first people on this planet. So if we were to take this reality and take this passage from the Bible, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, what is this passage saying? So go ahead and speak to me on what do you think this means?
That they're basing off based on what they think. Like they think Jesus is white because that's what they believe.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit more, Emily. So if the Bible says, and this is God's words, right? Let us make man in our image and after our likeness. And we know historically that African people, that black people are the first people on the planet. What is that saying?
That African people are made in God's image.
So what
They're
is that?
made to be in the likeness of God.
So Amar, what does that say about God?
That he's black.
Yep. According to the Bible, according to historical records, archaeological records, right? If we are to take this as true, then the Bible is arguing for the fact that God is black, right? Now, here's what's funny. African people, they rarely assigned a human characteristic to the deity that we understand to be God, right? You can see God represented in the sun. You can see God represented in other orishas, but rarely do you have God depicted in the form of man, right? But once that does take place, and going from what the Bible says, one could argue that that would mean God is black, right? Or have an African features. So let's get back to the science and the history and the archaeology of this, right? The first human ancestor was found in Africa. These are the remains of his bones, of her bones. She's famously called Lucy, but we place an African name on her, which we call Abioni. So it's going to give you a timeline of African evolution and migration. Lucy or Abioni was found around Ethiopia around 3.2 million years ago. As they dug deeper and did more excavations, they found bones dating back to 7 million years old. Recent uncoveries found bones up to 8 million years old. So that's why I say African people can be traced 8 million years old. So if I ask you, how old are African people? These are your acceptable answers. 3.2, because of Lucy. Bones have been found that date back 7 million years old, but more accurately, 8 million years old. So the three acceptable answers, right? 7 million years old, 8 million years old, and the final answer is unknown. The reason that unknown becomes an answer is because the more that they dig, the older African people get. So we really don't know how old African people are, but as of now, as of the research that has been presented to us now, we can say 8 million years old. So modern humans, what we call, the Homo Sapiens, they can be traced back as far as 200,000 years old in East Africa, but more recent research uncovered 340,000 years ago being traced back to Cameroon, okay? Migration from African peoples living outside of Africa could be traced back 60,000 years. And then finally, the appearance of the European could be traced back 30,000 years, right? So this is, again, the evolution of the African evolution and the migration. I'll give you a visual representation of this. So again, the first Africans being traced back 7 to 8 million years old. Modern humans, what they call Homo Sapiens, 300,000 years old. Large movement outside of Africa being traced 60,000 years old. The European being on the planet 30,000 years. So again, what sense does it make, especially for black folks, right, to assign our history to this 30,000-year-old epic, which is the European appearance, when we have an 8 million year epic? That is our history. Who would take $30,000 above $8 million? Nobody. That shit don't make sense. So what sense does it make to us continue to place our history within this 30,000 year experience? African individuals prior to European contact. Some of this might look like some of y'all cousins, some of y'all uncles, but who this really is, Narmer. Narmer was an ancient Kemetic pharaoh. When I say Kemet, I'm referring to Egypt, right? We know that Kemet is the original name for Egypt prior to European invasion. He was a pharaoh of the early dynastic period. Some consider him the unifier of Kemet, founder of the first dynasty, therefore the first pharaoh of unified Kemet. It's another individual. Who here are medical students? Anybody, if you are a medical student, are interested in going into the medical field? Has anybody heard of the Hippocratic Oath?
No, you can go, mister.
Has anybody heard of the Hippocratic Oath? Okay, so I'm assuming that's no. So if you go to medical school and you study to become a doctor and you become a doctor, you have to take what's called the Hippocratic Oath, saying that I will be fair to my patients, I will not use bias against my patients, etc., etc. The Hippocratic Oath is derived from Hippocrates, who was considered the Western father of medicine, okay? What you're looking at is Imhotep. He's the world's first multi-genius. The world's first multi-genius. He was the first architect, the first physician, the first engineer. He built the step pyramids in Kemet and is the architect of the step pyramids. He's also recognized as a priest, poet, sage, scribe, and astrologer, right? So he's a priest. He was a sage. He was a mystic man. He was a poet. He was a scribe. He wrote and he studied the stars. As a physician, he diagnosed and treated over 200 diseases, 15 of the abdomen, 11 of the bladder, 10 of the rectum, 29 of the eyes, 18 of the skin, nails, and tongue. He also performed surgery and practiced some dentistry. Here's the kicker, here's what's important. All of this occurred over 2,200 years before the Western father of medicine, Hippocrates, was born, okay? So he did all of this 2,200 years before Hippocrates was even born. But we recognize in the West, Hippocrates as the father of medicine. I say it's hypocrisy, right? About 100 years after his death, he was elevated to a medical demagogue and later a full god some 2,000 years after his death. He was also worshipped by the early Christians as either the first Christ or as one with Christ. So what that's saying is, in the Christian theology, Jesus is represented as the Christ. In early Christianity, that Jesus figure was occupied by Imhotep. Another African individual prior to European contact. It's a picture of him and his mother. Got to big up the black woman. If not for her, no one would be here. Scientific fact. This brother Akhenaten. Akhenaten was the pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Kemet. He ruled for 17 years and died roughly 1336 BCE or 1334 BCE. He's especially noted for abandoning traditional Kemetic polytheism and introducing worship centered on Aten. So what polytheism is, it's the worship of multiple gods, okay? So what Akhenaten did is he shifted the theology of the Kemetic society from worshiping multiple gods to the focus on one god, which is Aten. Akhenaten lived at the peak of Kemec's imperial glory. Kemet had never been richer, more powerful, or more secure. It's another African individual prior to European contact. Taharka. It's clear from historical accounts, Taharka was one of the greatest ancient Kemetic pharaohs. Taharka was described by the ancient Greek historian Strabo as having advanced as far as Europe, and even as far as the Pillars of Hercules in Spain. This feat alone would count him among the greatest military tacticians in the ancient world. Later, Spanish legendary chronicles also identified Tarco, as general of an Ethiopian army that supposedly campaigned in Spain in the 7th century BCE before his becoming pharaoh. This event has also held to account for the name of the Spanish city of Tarco, now Targonia. So he has a city in Spain named after him. There's also some biblical references of some of Taharka's feats. This goes back to Ricardo's point here. Brother Mansa Musa, we talked about him a little bit. Musa the First, commonly referred to as Mansa Musa, was the 10th king, the 10th Mansa or king, which is translated to King of Kings. Musa embarked upon a large building program, raising mosques and schools and colleges. Most famously, the ancient center of learning, the University of Sankore, was constructed during his reign. During the height of his power, Mali had at least 400 cities. Here are some images of the Moors. The Moors derived from this Mali culture, would migrate north to what is now known as Morocco. They crossed, I believe, I could be wrong on this, I believe it's the Iberian Peninsula, which allows them to go from Morocco to Spain. And they brought civilization to Europe. So if you know world history, you know that Europe was in what they call the Dark Ages, vast plague, vast famine. The Moors came in and helped bring them out of that by teaching them how to not have their animals in the barn. Not to have their animals in the home and place the animals in the barn to prevent diseases. How when you take a shit, you don't shit where you sleep, you shit outside, and here's how you have the plumbing system to wash that away. Literally, the Moors taught these Europeans how to bathe. Prior to the Dark Ages, they were not bathing. If you're paying attention to pop culture now, you're hearing a lot of these European celebrities talking about how they take minimal baths, right? This is part of Europe's ancient history, right? The science of wearing clothes that are light in the summer, clothes that are heavy in the winter, that derives from the Moors. Silk derives from the Moors. Spices derives from the Moors. So there's a lot of African culture and history that makes Europe what it is, okay? And again, we cannot foreclose the women in this experience. So here's some images of some profoundly powerful African women. One thing about African society, there was no separation between the capacities of what women could do and the capacities of what men could do. Women ruled and were just as fierce warriors as men were. So in the middle, we have Queen Makeba, who's responsible for the whole Ethiopian empire. To my left, on the top there, that is Aset. So when you think about for the Christian religion, you have the Trinity of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph that derives from the ancient Kemetic story of Aset, Asar, and Haru. So that is the image of Aset, who would kind of play the Mary figure. Below Aset is Ma'at, which we'll be reading about in a couple weeks. She is a goddess that represents the principles of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety. The Kemetic society was structured around these principles of Ma'at. To your right on the upper hand, the reason why I have this image on this pillar, this is a pillar to an ancient Kemetic temple. This is the Queen Nefertar. On the other side of the pillar is the king. Now, what becomes important about this is they're depicted at the same height, the same dimensions. So it's not made that the queen is smaller than the king or the queen is behind the king. They're equal. And they do that to signify the equality between men and women in the Kemetic society. And finally, toward the bottom, on my right, we have Ya Santiwa. She was a woman who led the Akan Empire against British imperialism, and she has the famous legend of the Golden Stool, and that kind of signifies and embodies her ability to be a fierce ruler. So these are some women who had significant roles in these ancient African kingdoms. So prior to European contact, Africa was organized in a certain fashion as well. So here's a map of how Africa was organized before colonialism and European invasion. Here's a look at some of the nation states that rule specific areas. You see Kush is a very large area. Kush would evolve into Ethiopia. You see directly above Kush, Kemet, which we know is Egypt. You see the Akan, where Ghana is. That's the ancient society of Akan. Ife, where Nigeria is, which will become Nigerian. So what's interesting about Ife and Akan evolves into a spiritual system. Ife evolves into Ifa, which is also an African spiritual system. A little more about the ancient Kemetic society. These are some looks at the ancient centers of learning, the ancient mystery schools in Kemet. If you look at the image to your bottom right, the pillars, you can't really see, but there's inscriptions on these pillars. Not only were these pillars used to hold up the structures, but they would teach you about the sciences of astrology. They'll teach you about math. They'll teach you about actual science. So everything in the Kemetic society was not only beautiful, but it has a pedagogical purpose, a purpose of learning. Another thing about the ancient Kemetic mystery schools, how we have, for example, freshmen, sophomores, seniors, juniors. In the Kemetic mystery schools is structured a little bit different. It's not about you being able to go through all your prerequisites as a freshman to be able to become a sophomore. It's about you mastering a spiritual principle. So just for example, it would not be until you're able to meditate for a certain amount of time that you would be able to go from a freshman to a sophomore, right? And there's no time on that. It's whenever you're able to accomplish your task. So everything in the Kemetic society as it pertained to education had a spiritual element to it. And again, talking about that spiritual element, they learned from the nature around them, right? The three main pyramids in Egypt are in direct alignment with the stars. And that's with this image on your left-hand side. It represents the pyramids in Kemet being aligned with Orion's belt. For ancient Kemetic folklore, they understood Orion to be Asar, the individual that serves as Joseph in the Holy Trinity. That would be that equivalent, right? So what the Kemetic sought to do was to build heaven on earth. That's why their society was designed in the way that it's designed. We're going to skip this video just for sake of time because I want to be able to get to any questions that you guys may have. Let's see. So there's a lot of debate around who are the ancient Kemetic people, right? Some scholars want to argue that the ancient Kemetic people were white. Some people want to argue that Kemet is separate from Africa. This is where you get the whole idea of sub-Saharan Africa juxtaposed to just regular Africa, right? But the Kemetics themselves had a very keen awareness of who they are, right? And you'll see from image A to your left that this is how the Kemetics seen themselves, right? Dark-skinned people, black people. Again, the term Kemet itself is the black land, right? So the figure B is described as the Indo-European, right? So they recognized who they were not, okay? The figure C is how they identified other blacks from Africa, right? That may not have been born in the Kemetic society. So let's just say you're from West Africa. This is how they'll view you. But again, they're very similar. You can really hardly tell the difference between figure A and figure C. And then figure D is what they call a Semitic people, people who are of mixed origins, okay? Also what you may know as like what they would call the Hyksos, right? So they had a period in time where these Semitic people would rule Kemet. This is getting into the Mali Empire. These are pictures of the University of Sangor and Timbuktu, which came to fruition under the rule of Mansa Musa. You have a look at some of the libraries on your bottom left there. I think there's another image of the library too. Again, this shows you the vastness of the Songhai and Mali Empire. It's really the majority of West Africa. These are the, the Dogon people, excuse me. What makes the Dogon people significant? There's a Sirius star A and Sirius star B. They were able to locate those stars with the naked eye. This is before a telescope. This is before a drone or any of that type of shit, right? They would elders would literally climb up a mountain, stare at the stars, and they were able to locate with their naked eye Sirius star A and Sirius star B. It wasn't until I believe the 1940s or 50s that American or Western technology was able to locate these stars. And as you look at the images and the paintings on these individuals, especially the image to your left, these images are representing reflections and homages to the stars. Okay, so let's see. You know what? We'll watch that video because I think we have a little more time than I thought, and I think it's only like a 10-minute video. So.
Restore what? Now you can see all three pyramids. Now in the further back is the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors had astronomical science, astrology, where they studied the stars and so forth. One of the things that's been brought to astronomers' attention is that they noticed that the pyramid of Khufu and Khafra, if you notice right here, are in a perfect alignment. Okay? It's a perfect alignment. But the question is that why would such a perfect alignment and perfect structure where they built the small pyramid of Menkaure off course? Can you see it off course? Yeah. But what they found, though, is that our ancestors were building the pyramids in alignment with the stars, that they were in rhythm with the astrology and the astronomical science of the universe, science of astrology or the study of the stars. And what they found is that the star system Orion was the star system of Osiris. Remember, the king wants to become one with Osiris. So by aligning the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure with Orion, and that's why they built the pyramid of Menkaure slightly over and not in alignment, because the pyramids were built off the alignment of the star system Orion. The star system Ceres was Isis. So our ancestors, in essence, were building heaven on earth. They were taking the science of the stars and building the pyramids exactly as they saw the heavenly body or the cosmological universe. Figure out why Menkaure's pyramid was not in a perfect alignment, but it fits with the alignment of the star system Orion. As well as the other pyramid layout, it fits into the constellation that our ancestors saw of Osiris. And that is the constellation of the man that they have today as a figure of a man. So you can take and put the star system Orion right over the pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure and see why they had the alignment of Menkaure slightly over, because it fit with the star system Orion, because the purpose was for the soul to ascend into heaven, for the spirit to ascend into heaven, to become one with Osiris. and the star system Orion was connected with Osiris. Keep in mind that the star system Orion was aligned perfectly with the chambers of the pyramids that we're going to deal with later on in our lecture series when we get into it. So this is serious knowledge to show you how profound our ancestors saw that they were building and with the constellation of the universe. Tomorrow when you go into Saqqara, you're also going to see the Pyramid of Unis, showing the first concept of ascension into heaven. Long before there was Christianity, long before there were little white angels with wings on there, that we get a concept that we're going to go to heaven. Unis already had the concept of ascension into heaven, or a spirit going into heaven known as astrotheology. So this is what our ancestors saw, the soul becoming one with the great god Osiris in the constellation of Orion, which was the symbol for Osiris. And the star system Ceres was for Isis. Powerful astronomical knowledge that our ancestors had, showing how in tune our ancestors were with the heavenly bodies. In essence, building heaven on earth. Even in the Hermetic text, it speaks of Asar is our father in heaven. And he looked down on his kingdom that he built. Hold this before me. So let me show you something here. This is the kingdom. This is Asar in Orion's belt now. See Asar in Orion's belt, looking down on his kingdom? In Amos in the Bible, it speaks of, seek of him who is of the star, the 7 stars of Orion. Now, let me lay something on you. Our Father, which art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is where it all is. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that was Asar. And come back here to do serious field educational work. So when someone tells you about the pyramids, you can really break it down. Break it down to our Father which art in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right here, this is where it started. That was taken from the Hermetic text of your ancestors long before the Ptolemies got the Jews to write the Bible, and the first European Bible was written right here in Egypt. And it was Ptolemy Philadelphus who got them to write for them, which they copied it from the pyramid text of our African ancestors. So now, can we validate this? Oh yes, we're going to validate this even further when we get inside of the museum in just a little while. And okay, brothers and sisters, as we talked about the pyramids and the capstone, this is a capstone of King Amenemhet, the third of the 12th dynastic period. These capstones were put on top of the pyramids. This capstone right here is from Hawawa. It's the capstone of Amenemhet III, as he was called Ni-Ma'at-Ra Amenemhet III, and that's his name here, Subet Ni-Ma'at-Ra, given life for eternity. And what you see here are the all-seeing eyes of Asar and Ra-Harakte, or the wings representing the rising spirit, the Sahu spirit. Remember, Asar, who was the great king, as I said, in Orion's belt, represented Asar. He was what? Our Father, which art in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where would we find the Orion at? Can we validate this? Can we validate with even a man by the name of Robert Bouvel, who many Egyptologists smashed down when he tried to say that Asar represented Orion's belt and Orion represented Sahu? That was the spiritual star for us to go to. Well, we can find it. You hold this for me. I want to show you something. Have patience here. This is very small. So where is this symbol at of Asar and Orion? Where is this symbol at? Well, let's go right over here and look closely. And what symbol do you see right here?
It's too much of the layer. The light.
What symbol do you see right there? You see Orion, you see Asar right there.
Right.
That validate that this capstone validates it on this capstone right here. Ni-Ma'at-Ra. This was of the 12th dynastic period. Over 4,000 years ago, this came from right here.
So I know that was a lot of information, right? It came very quickly. But let's process what you've heard. And a great way to process is to dialogue what you heard. So what are some comments, questions, points? What do you guys think? Do anybody want to call bullshit? Because that's a valid point of analysis also, right? Talk back what y'all think.
I don't think it's bullshit. I think all that stuff is crazy. But I do think it's just the fact that when the Europeans invaded, we just so happened to lose the war. So therefore, their stories got overarched with our stories, and all that history got hidden. And that happens often. But that's interesting to see those different type of things that I didn't know about. That was all real interesting.
Yeah. It says, to the victors go the spoils, right? So when you have war, the winners of the war gets to tell the stories of how things transpired, right? And that is how you could have stories of Asar, Aset, and Haru on the pyramids of Egypt or in the pyramids of Kemet, right? That date before we understand Christianity to take place. But more people know about Mary, Joseph, and Jesus than they do Aset, Asar, and Haru, right? To the victors go the spoils. So whoever wins the war can tell the story of the war. Same can be applied to the statement that Ricardo made earlier, right? About them coming in and taking all the texts from the Mali Empire and building their libraries, right? I find it interesting, not this past summer, but last summer, where we had all the rebellions and things like that, and all the commentary was around don't loot, don't loot, don't loot, don't loot, right? And I just couldn't help but think, so how the fuck did y'all museums get filled if y'all wasn't looting, right? How is it that all these European museums have these Benin statues and these Benin masks that come strictly from Africa, right? How is it that British museums have all these ancient Kemetic artifacts, right? So how is it that my looting is devalued and I'm just taking a little punk ass target in my city, but you can loot the whole world and that's justified, right? So we have to be able to pay attention to the contradictions at play and the way that our history is being told or understood. Other thoughts? Anything I could help clarify for anyone?
Not exactly clarify, but more in the terms of like, taking, because it was a lot of information and it's very hard to process at that speed. So more so like what thing should I focus on, or like, yeah, what should I look to understand like more in depth than other things? Or,
I'm gonna answer your question this way, Khalil, and let me know if I answered it. What I hear in your question is a question around my grade. Okay, like what information do I need to know for the test for the midterm? I don't care about that, bro. Whatever information stood out to you, whatever moved your spirit, whatever caused the hair on your arms to stand up, that's the information you need to be paying attention to, right? You guys need to know that framework, right? You should be familiar with how African American male theory works. And I will be using that framework throughout the semester so you get a chance to become more familiar with it, right? Again, if I ask you how old are African people, you should know the three acceptable answers are 7 million years old, 8 million years old, and unknown. Unknown because the further that they dig, the more that they uncover. But really, the intention behind this is not for you to make a checklist of information, but just to get the understanding of who these people are that we call African people, and that we'll be studying throughout this whole semester, right? What are the things that make their society tick? What are the things that they find of interest, right? And you can tell from that lecture, one, spirituality is of high importance, right? Two, education is of high importance, right? So these are two fundamental components of the people who will be investigating for the remainder of this semester, right? Another thing to think about, out of all the information that you just received, right? Think about how Black people are portrayed in our world today. Where's the tension between those two portrayals, right? The information that you just received about African people and how black people are presented to you on a quotidian or a daily basis? Where's the tension at play? Where's the contradiction at play?
Okay, so that did answer my question. Thank you. And in terms of tension, like the European stereotype often regards like black people as like lesser than, right, and quote unquote, and like and like dogs, for lack of a better term, right? But then with all the information provided, we can actually see that our ancestors were actually intellectuals of higher thinking, which I do find really interesting. And it sucks that like just a lot of this information was just disregarded when like they came into contact with like Europeans, right? So now I'm wondering like how much further we would have been if like we just continued on our path, right?
And you know,
yeah, no, that's it. That's just my thought.
And you know what, Khalil? Like, I think that too. And especially when I was younger, it was like, yo, man, if these motherfuckers wouldn't have gotten our way, black folks would have been so much better off, right? But now it's like what I'm really understanding, not only black folks, the world, right? Like, we have to think about the state of the world, right? And I'm not saying, oh, it's white. That's not what I'm saying. But we do know who's in power in this iteration of society, right? The white man, and I say that specifically, the white man is the individual in power. So by and large, then you are responsible for the way that the society operates, right? If you're coming from a space to where your values are education and spirituality, I do not believe the world will be in the space that it's in now. Global warming would not be a thing if you're using spiritual principles to interact with the earth, right? You wouldn't be in a highly racist society if you're using spiritual principles and true education, right, to ground society. So, Khalil, you're absolutely right. But for me, what's more fecund not only is where black folks would be, but how the world as a whole would be, right? Think about how the indigenous people of this planet, of this country, treated the land, right? Think about the honor that will be called, the people who we call the Native Americans paid to this land, right? Nothing was wasted. Everything was used purposely, right? There'll be no global warming if those in power operated with the land at that capacity, right? So you're absolutely right. What are some other thoughts about the tension between who you just learned African people to be and how you've been presented who African people are?
I just think it's crazy that, like, for me, I come from a Hispanic culture and we're taught all of this about Catholicism and Mary, Jesus. And I think it's crazy that even a lot of people aren't aware, but even if some people do become aware, it's about accepting that it might be true or is true. Because you can always be aware and not accept it. And I feel like for a lot of Hispanic people, they're very stubborn about what they believe, and they will not give a chance to think otherwise, to get out of their own reality. And I think that is just really crazy because I never really learned about this. Like, I was never aware about it. I just think it's really nice to know about it.
Thank you, Emily. Gabriel, did you have your hand up? Yeah, go ahead, Gabriel. You have to raise your hand to speak on it.
Yeah, I did have a question. Yeah, on Emily's point, I was also kind of had a very similar train of thought about it, which was like, I know that my parents are like coming from a very very religious beliefs. They're very they value their beliefs. They live their lives based on their beliefs, and they're very strong about it. But if that's how they are now, I'm assuming people have more or less, like, I'm just confused on how, I'm just so confused at the misinformation. Like, I'm just so confused at how, it's taken this long to more or less have all the information at hand, and even still people are having a hard time accepting it, right? Like, even still, I have to come with 30 different sources and whatever, and they can just pull an article off of Instagram, and you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I just don't, it's like hard to like wrap my mind around that.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
No, I hear you, Gabriel. No, I definitely hear you. Even for me teaching this, right? Like, it's like how is the thing that just keeps coming. Like, how do you go from this to where we're at now, right? And I think to Emily's point, right? You get comfortable in the stories that you tell yourself. And if you've been telling yourself, you know, Mary, Jesus, and Joseph for 300 years, you're comfortable in Mary, Jesus, and Joseph, right? And then also, especially when you're looking at religion, especially you talk about Christianity and Catholicism, right? Is that impending doom of hell will keep you believing what you've been taught to believe, right? That's the whole purpose of hell. Just like you, Gabriel, my mom is praying for me right now just because the shit that I'm talking about with y'all is out of line with Christianity, right? Like, I got the holy water being thrown on me as we speak. I'm imagining, right? Because that's what she knows, and she's afraid that her oldest son is going to hell because of some information that he found out, right? So this hell keeps us bound to these tropes that we've been taught, right? And this becomes very generative when we transition into the institution of enslavement, because I could very well say, you know what? Be a good slave, because that's what the Bible says, right? You'll get prosperity and peace in the afterlife, but here, your ass is mine, right? You're going to work from sun up to sundown because that's what the Bible and that's what I say do, right? So as these things evolve, they become very useful tools for oppression. And they become manipulated in a way that certain people could use them to their advantage. It took me a very long time not to have an adverse look at Christianity specifically, because I felt that this was the greatest tool used to oppress my people, right? And I used to I couldn't stand the church. I couldn't stand to see a cross. Fuck that, right? But as I got older, I realized what happened, right? It's not that Christianity is inherently bad. It's been used at a way that's evil, right? Just like Islam. Islam is not inherently bad, but it's been manipulated to be able to, people could do evil things with it, right? So it's not about the subject itself, it's about how that subject is being used that becomes problematic, right? So, I mean, because there's fundamental truths to Christianity. And a lot of that information stems from what these African people were doing back in Kemet, right?
Yeah, I would like to also say something about that, in my personal opinion, coming attention a lot in the video. They mentioned something about their beliefs in heaven and the things that they would do with the pyramids and everything. And that really, it's really interesting if you think about it, because they were already thinking about heaven. They were already creating that type of beliefs in their culture. And that's what they're but what I noticed that after time, that belief changed, because other cultures came out, other people had their own beliefs, wanted to create their own culture. So, and now we're here. We have our own culture. We have we have Christianity. We have different types of beliefs, and like you said, it's probably what they have been putting into us. But since the beginning, the thing that they were already having the type of mindset, it's also really interesting. Like, they were thinking big, they were creating things for us, and it's something that really impacts.
You know, Arcieli, something that you said that was really generative for me. You said a lot of the stuff that's in the Bible, they were creating in their culture, right? So in the Bible, it talks about on heaven as it is on earth. That's what they said. But this is what the Kemetic people were doing. And it's evident within their architecture, right? It's evident within their spiritual science. You've seen it. It's evidence of that. It's not just something that people say. So I think that's a really, really good point, Arcieli, that and I'm glad you brought that out. Other thoughts, other comments, other questions? Anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to know more of?
I got a question about like the Moors and stuff. So I'm mixed with a Creole, and the Moors ruled Europe, and they learned how to speak French, right? And my aunties, they're like born in like the 1940s, and they used to live in Louisiana, and she would tell me that like her parents would curse in French just so like their kids wouldn't understand what they were saying and stuff. And my last name is Moore, so is there like a kind of connection to that or something like that?
I don't want to say no, because I don't know enough to know. But far as the Creole piece, we're gonna get to. I want to say maybe about the 6th week of course. I'm gonna read this book or a portion of this book that's called Poetics of Relation, and he talks by Edward Glissant, and he talks about this process of creolization and how it kind of begins to get filtered into the Caribbean, into Louisiana, and things of that nature. More so from what you're speaking in regards to the Moors, there is a confluence between Arabic and some Spanish, some aspects of like Spanish speaking in Spain, right? That linguistic confluence is due to the Moors. I don't know how they really infused into France, because I do believe, I'm not a historian, so I could be wrong on this, but I want to say that that European invasion by the Moors predated the advent of France, if that makes sense. But again, I could be wrong. I'm not a historian. I could be off a little bit on my dates, but I do want to say that the Dark Ages was before France kind of came to be.
Appreciate it.
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Let's get one more from somebody we have not heard of before we close out. Samina, what are your thoughts on what you've heard or came across today?
My thoughts are, I feel like it was a good, like the video overall, like I feel like the video hit all like some good points. I don't really have, like right now at the moment, I didn't really have too much to say.
Okay, what were your thoughts? Anybody, I won't put you on the spot, but anybody, share with me your thoughts on the role of African women in the presentation today.
I kind of found that to be pretty cool, and kind of how you related it to like how different would our society be now if we, were aware of that. I don't know. I just think it would have been pretty awesome for women to be known,
The male ego is very fragile and it's grandiose. And those are two characteristics that's very poor for leadership. I'll say that one more time. The male ego is very fragile and grandiose. And those are two very poor characteristics for leadership, right? So with that being said, I think we'd be better off as a society to have women rule the society. Think about who raises your children. Your first teacher is who? Your moms, right? So there's a certain level of care, there's a certain level of nurturing that is innate in women that we miss out by always having men rule things, right? Bianca, go ahead.
I like how you said like how the women, like the kings and queens, they weren't like, the women weren't behind the kings. They were both like equally king and queen. Like I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how a lot of the things that we need now, right? Like balance between men and women in pay and things like that. A lot of these modern problems that we have weren't even things before modernity, right? Like no one thought about women being oppressed because women were viewed equally, right? And it's funny how we operate under the auspice of progress, right? We progressed so far, but when you look at what was going on back there, did we progress really, or did we take vast steps back? Because we're trying to fix some fundamental shit just to recognize certain groups of people being human, right? So how far advanced have we really come as a society, right? Okay. So I will end there.